Have you ever wondered what happens when a powerful businesswoman realizes that the success she built came at the cost of the very people who helped her get there? Today, we have a story that will shock you, make you question everything, and possibly even inspire you to rethink your own beliefs about success, justice, and the people who make it possible. Stay with us as we dive into the journey of Emma Williams, a woman who had it all but discovered something that changed her forever. But the real question is, will she be able to make things right? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Welcome, everyone. Today, I have a story that will touch your heart, make you think, and hopefully inspire change. This is the story of Emma Williams, a successful businesswoman in New York whose world is about to be turned upside down. You see, Emma built her empire from the ground up with grit, determination, and the belief that hard work would always pay off. But as you'll soon learn, not everything is as it seems. Emma Williams had always prided herself on being a model of efficiency. Her company, headquartered in the bustling streets of New York, was the epitome of success. Every corner of her office screamed discipline. Sleek. Modern. Minimalist. There was no room for sentimentality. No time for softness. She built this empire through long nights, sleepless hours, and an unshakable belief that those who worked hardest would be rewarded. For years, her formula worked. Her employees worked long hours, kept their heads down, and produced results. And as her business grew, so did her reputation. Emma was respected. Even feared by some. Her philosophy was simple: work hard, and you will rise. Fail to deliver, and you're out. It was a cutthroat world, but for Emma, it was the only way. But lately, something was different. Emma had begun to notice that despite the high salaries and demanding culture, her employees weren't as productive as they used to be. Something was off. There were fewer smiles in the office. Fewer faces eager to push through the long hours. She had always prided herself on being a fair employer. But even she couldn't ignore the mounting layoffs and the drained energy in the building. Her company, once the pinnacle of success, was beginning to feel hollow. One employee, in particular, caught Emma's attention. His name was John Miller. A man who seemed to fit her mold perfectly. Hard worker. Never complained. Frequently worked double shifts. The kind of employee Emma admired. Silent. Diligent. Dependable. But something about John didn't sit right with her. Despite his dedication, he didn't seem to thrive like the others. He wasn't rising through the ranks. He was stuck. Unnoticed. Working harder than ever. Yet never getting ahead. Emma's curiosity was piqued. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Emma sat at her desk, overlooking the streets of New York. Her mind raced with thoughts. She glanced at John as he packed up his things and quietly walked out of the building, just as he did every evening. But tonight, something was different. He wasn't heading home directly. Emma, almost instinctively, grabbed her coat and decided to follow him. She didn't know why. But a feeling deep inside told her she needed to know more. She trailed him from a distance, keeping her car behind his as they left the bright lights of Manhattan and drove into quieter neighborhoods. The city lights flickered in her rearview mirror as they drove farther away from the bustling streets. Eventually, John made a turn onto a narrow street leading to an old, weathered building in Brooklyn. The area seemed worlds apart from the luxury of Manhattan. Small, rundown houses. Some barely standing. Others covered in graffiti. Emma parked a few blocks away and walked the rest of the way, keeping a low profile. She followed John up a set of creaky stairs to an apartment that looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades. From her vantage point, Emma could see through the window. Inside, two young children waited eagerly by the door. Their eyes lit up as John entered, holding a small bag of food in his hands. They were hungry. Desperate for the little meal he had brought. Emma's heart sank. The man she had seen as her model employee wasn't living the life she had imagined. No sleek apartment. No expensive dinners. Instead, poverty. Struggling. Fighting just to make ends meet. The children grabbed the food, devouring it as if it was the first meal they'd had in days. One of them, a young girl, looked up at John and asked softly, "Daddy, will you be here tomorrow for breakfast?" John hesitated. His face softened. And then, he forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll be here." But Emma saw it. The doubt. He wasn't sure if he could keep that promise. Sitting in her car, Emma could barely breathe. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles turned white. She had built her company on the idea that those who worked the hardest should be rewarded. But John? A man who worked harder than anyone. Was struggling. His children were hungry. Living in a dilapidated apartment. And Emma had never even noticed. She had been so focused on efficiency. On pushing her employees to their limits. That she had failed to see the human side of their lives. How did I miss this? Emma whispered to herself, her voice trembling. She had always considered herself a fair employer. She had believed that hard work would always lead to success. But now? She was questioning everything. Was it possible that in her relentless pursuit of productivity, she had overlooked the people who made her empire possible? That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, the image of John's tired face haunting her. She had always thought of her employees as numbers. Assets. But John Miller? He wasn't just an employee. He was a father. A man struggling to provide for his family. And she had ignored that. She had to change things. But the real question was, would it be too late? Emma made a decision. She couldn't just sit in her office, making assumptions. She needed to see things for herself. So, the next morning, instead of heading to her luxurious office in Manhattan, Emma drove back to Brooklyn. To the very streets John called home. And for the first time in years, she walked among the people she had never taken the time to see. What she found would change everything. Forever. As Emma walked through the streets of Brooklyn, she saw a world completely different from the one she was used to. The buildings were old. The streets were worn down. The people? They moved slowly, their faces tired. She had spent her life surrounded by luxury. Polished boardrooms. Glamorous business dinners. But here? Here was the reality she had never cared to see. And for the first time, she was forced to face it. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from John Miller. "Miss Williams, can we meet for lunch?" Emma's heart skipped a beat. John didn't know it yet. But the course of their conversation was about to change everything. She made her way to a small cafe tucked into the corner of a Brooklyn street. The kind of place easily overlooked. Not fancy. Not polished. Just real. She arrived early, nervously tapping her fingers on the table. Unsure of what to say. John arrived shortly after, his usual steady walk unchanged. He was polite, as always. Professional. But Emma saw something different now. She saw him. Not just an employee. Not just a worker. A man. "Thank you for meeting me, John." Emma's voice was calm. But inside, she was anything but. John nodded. "Of course, Miss Williams." He sat across from her, his smile polite. But his eyes? Cautious. They sat in silence for a moment. Neither of them knew what to say. This was the first time they had spoken outside of the office. And for the first time, Emma wasn't here as his boss. She was here as a person. A human being who had been blind for far too long. Finally, Emma took a deep breath. "John, I've been doing some thinking." She hesitated. Then continued. "I didn't know. I didn't realize what you've been going through. John's face hardened. For a moment, he looked away. Then, after a long pause, he said quietly, "You don't need to worry about me, Miss Williams. I'm just doing what I need to do for my family." "I know I'm not the only one." Emma shook her head. "No, John. You're right. You're not the only one." Her voice was heavy with the weight of her own failure. "And that's exactly why I'm here." She looked him in the eye. "I've been so focused on the company's success that I missed what really matters. I missed the people. And I want to change that." John stared at her. Disbelief in his eyes. "You want to change, what, exactly?" His voice was careful. Not angry. Just unsure. Emma leaned forward. "I want to make sure that people like you who work the hardest don't have to struggle. I want to make sure you can provide for your family without sacrificing everything." John exhaled sharply. Then, his voice cracked as he spoke. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this, Miss Williams." His hands tightened into fists on the table. "I'm barely hanging on. I just want to do right by my kids. They deserve better than this." Emma felt a lump in her throat. This man. This dedicated, hardworking man. He had given everything to her company. And she had given him nothing in return. She swallowed hard. "I'm going to fix this, John." Her voice was firm. Unshakable. "I promise you. No one should have to live like this." For the first time, John looked vulnerable. His walls lowered. He didn't speak for a long moment. And for the first time in her entire career, Emma felt like she was truly listening. This wasn't about business. This wasn't about profits. This was about people. About dignity. About justice. But could she really change things? Could she change the culture of her company? Could she give people like John a better life? Or was she already too late? The next morning, Emma made a decision. She couldn't just talk about change. She needed to act. She arrived at her office early. The city was still asleep as she stood in front of her window, gazing at the skyline of New York. The same view she had seen every day. But today, it felt different. Today, she was going to make a change. She wasn't going to continue down the same cold, relentless path. She had a responsibility to her employees. To John. To every person who had ever worked hard for her company. Her assistant, Rachel, knocked on the door. "Miss Williams, the board meeting is scheduled for 11 a.m. Are you ready?" Emma nodded. Her mind already racing with everything she needed to say. "Rachel, I need you to do something for me." Her voice was calm but firm. "Gather information on our employees. I want to know how many are working double shifts. How many have children? How many are struggling financially? I need to know the truth." Rachel hesitated. "Are you sure about this, Miss Williams?" Emma's eyes didn't waver. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." 11 a.m. The board meeting. Emma sat at the head of the long, sleek conference table. The room was filled with serious faces. Executives. Investors. People who had only ever cared about one thing. The numbers. Emma, one of them, began. "The quarterly reports are strong. What's on your mind today?" Emma took a deep breath. And then, for the first time in her career, she spoke her truth. "We've been so focused on financial success that we've forgotten the most important part of this company. Our employees." The room fell silent. Eyes narrowed. Suspicion. Doubt. Finally, one of the senior investors, David Thompson, spoke. "What do you mean, forgotten them?" His voice was skeptical. This company thrives because we focus on efficiency and productivity. Emma met his gaze. I know that, David. But we can't keep pushing people to their limits without considering their well-being. She pressed on. We need to implement fair wages, childcare benefits, support systems for those struggling. We need to invest in our people, not just our profits. The board members exchanged uncertain glances. Emma could feel the tension in the room. But she wasn't backing down. Not this time. Finally, after a long pause, David spoke again. You're talking about a shift in our entire business model. It's a huge risk. Emma's eyes didn't waver. Then let's take it. The room fell into silence. A shift in the business model? A risk? Emma could see the hesitation in their eyes. For years, they had operated with a singular mindset, profit first, efficiency above all. Now, she was asking them to rethink everything. David Thompson leaned forward, his fingers tapping the polished table. Emma, do you realize what you're suggesting? His tone was careful, measured. You want us to invest more in employees, raise wages, offer benefits. That's going to cut into profits. His eyes narrowed. What if it backfires? Emma took a deep breath. She knew this wouldn't be easy. But she had spent the night thinking, calculating. And for once, her calculations weren't about numbers. They were about people. David, she said, keeping her voice steady. What if we don't change? She looked around the room. At the executives. At the people who had helped her build this empire. We've spent years pushing our employees to the limit, expecting more and more. But have we ever stopped to ask what it's costing them? She let her words settle. Some board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others crossed their arms, waiting. I followed one of our hardest working employees last night. She paused. She saw their expressions change. John Miller. He's worked for us for years. Never complained. Always gave his best. Her voice grew softer. And yet, last night, I watched him walk into a tiny apartment in Brooklyn. 2 kids waiting at the door. Hungry. Clutching onto a meal as if it was the first one they'd had in days. She swallowed. The memory's still raw. Tell me, David. Tell me, all of you. How is that fair? Silence. Not a single person spoke. David sighed, running a hand over his face. Finally, he leaned back. What do you propose? Emma sat up straighter. This was her moment. She had spent the night crafting a plan. And she wasn't backing down. A complete restructuring of our company's priorities. Fair wages for employees at every level. Childcare benefits for working parents. An emergency fund for those facing financial struggles. A murmur rippled through the boardroom. Some skeptical. Some intrigued. She continued. We always say we want dedicated employees. Well, dedication shouldn't come at the cost of survival. She met David's gaze. If we do this right, we won't lose profit. We'll gain something better. Loyalty. Productivity. A workforce that actually wants to be here. She let out a slow breath. Then, she added. And if we don't? We lose them. One by one. Until there's no company left to run. Silence. Then, slowly. David nodded. All right. His voice was quiet, but firm. Let's take the risk. A shift had begun. And there was no turning back. The news spread fast. By the next morning, employees were buzzing. Something was happening. Something big. Emma stood in the large company auditorium. Hundreds of employees gathered before her. Murmurs filled the air. Some excited. Some nervous. Some skeptical. She took a deep breath. And began. "Good morning, everyone." Her voice carried through the room. "I know you're wondering why I called this meeting. And I know that, in the past, meetings like this haven't always been good news." A few nervous chuckles. She continued. "But today is different. Because today, I want to talk about something we've all been ignoring for too long." She scanned the room. Saw John Miller standing near the back. Watching. Waiting. For years, this company has thrived on hard work. Your hard work. And for years, I believed that was enough. I believed that if we provided high salaries and opportunities for growth, that would be all you needed. She paused. Took a breath. And then, the words she never thought she'd say. I was wrong. A ripple went through the crowd. Eyes widened. People shifted forward, listening. She continued. I followed an employee home last night. A gasp in the crowd. She raised a hand. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted to understand. She looked directly at John. John Miller has worked for this company for years. He has done everything we've asked. And yet, he can barely feed his children. She let the weight of that statement sink in. Some employees nodded in quiet agreement. Others exchanged glances. This was their reality, too. Emma cleared her throat. That ends today. Starting now, this company is changing. She listed the changes. Fair wages. Better benefits. A company-wide support system for employees in need. The reaction? At first, stunned silence. Then, applause. Slow, hesitant at first. Then growing. Louder. Stronger. Until the room erupted. Emma scanned the faces before her. For the first time, she saw hope. Real, genuine hope. John Miller approached her after the meeting. His voice was quiet, but full of emotion. Thank you, Miss Williams. You have no idea what this means. Emma smiled. A real smile. One she hadn't felt in a long time. I think I do, John. And it's only the beginning. For the first time in her career, she felt like a true leader. Not just a businesswoman, but a person who truly saw the people who built her success. But would it last? Could she keep this promise? Or would the pressures of the business world pull her back? What do you think? Will Emma succeed in transforming her company? Or will she face new obstacles she never expected? Let us know in the comments. And stay tuned. Because the next chapter will change everything. Thank you for watching. We truly appreciate you taking the time to hear this story. Your support means the world to us. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe. And remember, success isn't just about numbers. It's about the people who make it happen. See you in the next one.